The topic that was given to me was the calling of the family. So what does it look like to have a calling for a family? Much of what we'll talk about is in some ways a repeat of what Pastor Ryan has said, but we'll make it more specific to the application of the family, which makes sense. Whatever our calling is as believers individually, that's going to inform our calling as a family. So question is, what calling has God given to the family? And more specifically, what is the mission that he has given to your family? So just like an individual or a church or a business should have a sense of purpose, the same would be true for a family. If you think about your family, whether you're single, married without kids, married with kids, in all of those family sizes, we should have a purpose for our family. And I think too many families don't take time to think about what is their God-given purpose as a family unit. What is it that they are to accomplish? What's their sense of identity? And then from that, what is their purpose in living their days? And so, anybody know the mission of Open Door? I might use calling and mission interchangeably, by the way. So, anybody know the mission of Open Door?
It's on here. Love God and make His gospel known.
Right. Love God and make His gospel known. Just fairly simple, straightforward. And then our core values, you might know as believe, live, share, and multiply. And those are just sort of some foundational principles for why we do what we do and how we accomplish our mission. And I think what I'm proposing to you is that it'd be a similar mission statement for the family. If you think about the great commandment in Scripture, what is that?
Love God with all your heart.
Yep.
And strength.
Right. And then,
Your neighbor as yourself.
so love God, love others. And what's the great commission?
To make
Go
His
to
gospel.
all the world and make disciples of all men.
Right. So what I would recommend to you is that would be the mission of the family would be to love God, love others, and then to make disciples. So we are a family who loves God first, we love others, and we're actively seeking to disciple those in our home and those outside of our home. And so however you want to put that into a sentence or a mission statement for your family, I would encourage you to think about what that might look like. And then I've broken it down into some core values that I would recommend. And these aren't exhaustive. These would be just, I think, some primary categories. You could probably get even more specific in some ways as you think about the mission of your family. So let's just talk through those and some of the key parts of those. I believe that God ordained the family unit as part of His perfect creation. We see the family before and after the fall. It wasn't just something that came before the fall or just after the fall, but God created Adam and Eve. So He knew that man didn't need to be alone, so He gave him a companion. And then even after the fall, we see the family continue, and God has been clear that the family has a mission. And we'll talk about some of those passages of Scripture that make that clear. But we also know that the culture is trying to destroy the family unit, from sanctity of human life issues to gender issues. Just in general, just a breakdown of the family is what we're seeing. And I think all the more important it is for us who are followers of Christ to be committed to God's idea of what family is and the purpose for family. And so I hope that this idea of a mission for your family, what is the calling of your family, what is the mission of your family, will help you be faithful to live this out. So here are some of the fundamental beliefs, the core values that I think each family should commit to. The first would be know God through His Word. So as husband, as wife, again, everybody in here is at least married with kids, actually. So husband and wife should be committed to knowing God through His Word. That's where it all starts. You can't pass along to your kids something that you don't have. So as individuals, you should be seeking to know God, to be committed to His Word, to commune with Him in prayer. A lot of what Pastor Ryan just talked about is something that we should be committed to doing. And then we're setting an example for our kids. The goal should be that we have a gospel-centered home. So a gospel-centered home usually isn't going to happen unless you have gospel-centered individual lives. And so as mom and dad, as husband and wife, you need to be seeking the Lord individually, walking with Him closely, communing with Him in prayer and through His Word, so that you can stay really focused on the mission that He has for you. And then an important thing that we want to do is we want to train our children to do the same. And that's where I think a lot of parents fall short, is they may, I know in my generation, faith wasn't talked about a lot in the home. You know, my parents made sure we were in church, but we didn't have gospel conversations in the home. I don't know if it was just the way my parents were raised. It seemed to be something they weren't really comfortable talking about. They just made sure we were in a context where we were learning the gospel. And I knew my parents prayed. I knew my parents were in the scripture in some form or fashion, but they didn't disciple me. I was discipled by the church, and I don't think that's the way that it should be. So we want to train our children to know and love God, and that's something we have to be intentional about. If you look at Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 10, it says, "Listen, Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. These words that I am giving you today are to be in your heart. Repeat them to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them be a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your city gates." And I think there's a couple of things that are here that are important. First, it's a repeat of the great commandment to love God first and foremost. And then second is that we're to train our children to do the same. That it gives the idea here that just in the everyday activities of life, that we're teaching our children the Word, that we're growing them up in what it means to just relate to the Lord and to see life from a gospel perspective. And then lastly, this bind them on as a sign in your hand and on the doorpost. To me, that's almost like writing a mission statement above your house. Like, this is who we are, letting the world know that. So a very important verse as you think about the mission of your family. And then there's a number of ways that you can help disciple your children. I think family devotions are an important thing. If you've attempted family devotions, they can be difficult to get into a right routine, to find the right way to go about it. You can feel like the biggest failure. But I think that the most important thing is that you just keep trying. So find something that works for you and your family. It might have to be changed at different seasons of life. You know, when like right now, Addison has to be up like at 5:45 for school. So we can't all do something in the mornings. Evenings can be challenging because as kids get older, they get busier. And so it's hard to get everybody together. So but just before the Lord, I would encourage you to decide what being faithful to family devotion looks like. Don't set yourself up for failure, though. Maybe 7 days a week is not the ideal, but regularly recurring sometime where you're together talking about the things of the Lord are important, and that's what I would encourage you to do. Carrie and I, we do better at this sometimes than others, but we keep, when we find that we're slacking off, we get started again. Right now it's a combination of a few different things. There's a book called 10 Questions Every Christian Teen Should Know, something like that. And so we're just reading through that as a family, kind of an apologetic, a lot of cultural topics. And so we're discussing those as a family. And then just in the moments, everyday moments of life, we're able to talk about, how God sees things and why we should interpret, cultural events in a certain way based on the scriptures. So family devotions are important. Some families use catechisms. Pastor Doyen has a good catechism tool that he can make available to you. And this probably is best for the younger ages, where it's just a series of questions and answers about Christian theology. Ask a question and the kids are taught an answer. And so it's a way to train them in doctrine and theology from a young age. And then partnership with a local church. As I said, we shouldn't relegate it to the church. We shouldn't expect the church to disciple our children exclusively, but it is a partnership, and that's the way Open Door sees it, is that we are partnering with you to disciple your children. So we want to equip you to do it, and we're also providing opportunities for the children to come and hear the gospel and to be discipled. And so it's a partnership, and so I would encourage you to make those opportunities available to your children. And then just pointing your children toward God and His Word should be the norm in our homes. Just making the gospel central Like your children would say, what's the most important thing to our family? It's the gospel. It's our relationship with Christ. And then that influences, as Pastor Ryan said, really the way we think about every other part of family life. And then the goal should be the salvation of our children, their baptism, their independently learning how to relate to the Lord as a follower of Christ, and then eventually just serving Christ faithfully. So know God through his word would be the first core value. The second one would be love as Christ loved. Mark 10:45 would be a highlight verse there. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So this is that love God, love others. So as we look to the life of Christ, we see that Jesus loved people in regular and amazing ways. He would just meet all kinds of people who had needs, whether it was need for healing, or maybe they were marginalized from society and he wanted to know they had value. But Jesus cared for people, and we need to do the same. And so that's what I've called incarnational ministry to others. We become the hands and feet of Jesus to people outside of our homes. And so as a family, think about what that looks like. Part of this would be, thinking about how you spend your time. If you have no time to minister to other people, then that's a problem. I mean, if all your time is committed to making sure your kids are involved or happy or whatever, then there's no time to be intentional about ministering to other people. And so as you're thinking about the mission of your family, again, you want to have a plan. Again, like Pastor Ryan said, if we don't think about it first, if we don't think about what is our plan, then we end up just sort of reactionary, doing this or doing that, but we don't have a broader sense of purpose. Like, this is the purpose of our family. These are the priorities of our family. And so finding ways to be intentional in ministering to other people. It could be serving with a local ministry. It could be just being intentional with your neighbors, or helping your kids understand the sanctity of life and the value of every life, and being friendly to those who aren't like them, or looking for those at school or in their groups of friends who seem to be left out or made fun of or marginalized for whatever reason, and just helping them to develop a sincere compassion for all kinds of people. Using your home as a resource for ministry, opening your home, inviting people in to minister to them, whether it's your care group or neighbors or friends, just people that God puts in your path. Being willing to open your home and invite them in is a great way to show your kids what it looks like to love and serve other people. Carrie, anything you want to add to that? Those incarnational ministry or hospitality?
I think that sometimes when we think about opening our homes, we think that we have to have everything just so, and I've had to learn over the years that that's really not what's most important, but just being available to people. And hospitality doesn't have to be just done inside the home. Sometimes you can just offer yourself, going for a walk, or meeting someone for coffee, or having a play day. It just looks different in different seasons of life for all of us, but we can all be hospitable in different ways.
And I think it's good for our kids to see that modeled, but also understand why we do it. I mean, like in our case, we host our care group, and so our kids know that that's what we do on Wednesday nights, and that means that our schedule's pretty scaled back that night so that we can serve our care group families. They know that there's times we may need them to look after the younger kids, that they're involved in serving in that way, or as we invite people into our home, that we want them to be a part of that as well. So even if it's just adults coming over for dinner, that we expect our kids to sit and to listen and to be attentive. One of the things that we've had to teach our kids is don't just talk, but listen, especially if it's somebody that they know. They might have a tendency to just talk a lot, talking about themselves, talking about their interest, and we would teach them to, listen more than you talk, ask questions, develop an interest in this person. And so that hospitality is a real important ministry for our families. And then I put commit to a whole life ethic. So again, this is something that Open Door is really trying to champion, that it's not just the unborn that we're advocating for. It starts there. But if we're advocating for the unborn, we do it because we believe that every life has value because we're all made in the image of God. And so then when a baby is not aborted but born, we got orphans around the world that need our care, whether it's fostering or adoption or global orphan care. You've got people with disabilities, adults and children, that need to know that their lives matter, that they have value. There's other marginalized groups. There's the elderly. There's just so many people in our world that need to know that they matter, that we value them as followers of Christ because Christ values them. Again, our culture is moving in the opposite direction here. We're saying life, an unborn life doesn't matter, or somebody with a disability doesn't have, their life is less valuable because they don't have as much to contribute to society. Same for the elderly, that the color of our skin, some lives are more important than others, or the country that we live in or where we're from, all of those things, rich or poor. I mean, there's so many distinctions that we make to say that one group of people's life is more valuable, even to our society. And we know that that's not true. So we want our children to understand that all life matters to God because everyone is made in His image. And so you're committing to this whole life ethic. And so whatever that looks like in your home, I would encourage you to champion that. And just being a witness, there's this idea of disruptive witness. The staff has read a book called, I don't know if I don't remember if that's the title of the book or not, but that's the theme, the idea that that in our current culture, one of the most effective forms of evangelism is that we're just showing people the love of Christ. So I'm not advocating for actions and no words, but I'm saying that, and increasingly it seems that people, before they can hear our words of gospel, they need to know that we love them. So sort of this relational evangelism. But not just that, but so this idea of disruptive, what's disruptive about that is it's becoming so uncommon for people to just be kind to one another, right? And so if someone experiences our kindness motivated by our love for God and love for others, then that's kind of this idea that we're disrupting the culture. And so just teaching your kids the importance of that, the value of that is a great way that we can be evangelists, that we can be witnesses, is that we are not following the norms of the culture, but instead we're showing people kindness, we're inviting people into our homes, we're not isolating like culture tends to do more and more, and being a disruptive witness in that way. All right, the third one is be committed to the local church. Hebrews 10:23-25, I know is a common verse to you all. It says, "Let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. And let us consider how to stir up one another to love and good works, not neglecting to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near." So another growing, it seems, norm in even the Christian culture is kind of less church. We've moved from 2 or 3 times a week. Back in, if you grew up in a traditional church, it was Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. There was a prayer meeting. There was a door-to-door evangelism. There was all kinds of youth events, and maybe that was extreme. But we've moved to the opposite extreme now, where it's less church. Many churches just expect you to be there on Sunday morning. Give an hour of your week, and not even serve. Come and worship, and then that's it for the week. We have really tried to fight against that. We've always wanted our members to worship and serve, or worship and grow, provide opportunities for you to serve, for you to be discipled. And so finding the right rhythms for that is important. But I would encourage you to make your commitment to the local church a priority. And you've got to count the cost. So Sunday in our culture is just a second Saturday. That's what it's become. I mean, have you noticed how many how many soccer games are starting at 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning up the street at the field? It really is a second Saturday. It's no longer a sacred day. And so if you are committing yourself to the local church, then at some point there's going to be a rub there where you've got to decide, are we making ourselves available for church on Sundays, or are we making ourselves available to something else? And I'm not saying that you can't figure out how to do sports, but I'm just warning you that it's a significant struggle. And I know most of your kids are older, but for young families that haven't gotten to the age of sports and extracurricular activities, we really need to help them count the costs. What does it mean for my kid to be on a travel team? Does that mean that I'm gone? It probably means you're gone a couple Sundays a month. And so there's accounting the cost there, right? And so I also hear a lot of families that will say, even families that visit the church, it's almost like their kids are making the decision based on how much fun they had in Sunday school or whether they liked the student ministry. I don't think we should make church optional for our kids. We, as mom and dad, choose the church that we feel like is the best fit for our family, and then we encourage our children we involve our children in the discipleship and fellowship opportunities that the church provides. And then serve and give. Pastor Ryan has talked about these, that we do it willingly and cheerfully. And then practice the one another commands in Scripture. Really, we began our talk today about Open Doors' mission statement, to love God and make His gospel known. We can't accomplish the mission that God's given us as we even think about it more specifically through our budget categories and our ministry commitments. We can't accomplish that without you guys, right? We can't accomplish it fully and effectively without every member participating. And I'm not just talking about giving, I'm talking about serving. We can't accomplish all the ministry that we want to do if we don't have members that are engaged in serving, using the gifts and abilities that the Lord's given them. Nor can we do it from a funding perspective if our members aren't giving cheerfully and regularly. So, I wouldn't want you to think that the mission of the church just goes on because we're an organization. We are a family of families that has a mission that God's given us. And the only way that we can accomplish that is with your participation. And so that should be an important part of your mission as an individual family, is participation and commitment to the local church. The fourth is live as faithful stewards. So time, finances, those two in particular, I think you have to be intentional about how you slice that up. If you can't just add this and add that without thinking about how it impacts your mission, right? So if discipling your children is an important part of your mission, then you've got to make sure there's time in the day or time in the week to do that. If incarnational ministry and hospitality is an important part of your mission as a family, then you've got to make sure that you have time built into the schedule of your family to do those things. So it's thinking at an early stage in your family, what's our mission, what's going to be our purpose, how are we going to live faithfully before the Lord, and it will have to be tweaked from time to time. But you've got to remind yourself of these priorities, and as new seasons come and new opportunities come, you've got to again count the cost. What does saying yes to this mean in fulfilling this mission that God's given to my family? And then the same with your finances. If you don't have a plan, then things probably aren't going to work out the way that you would like. So whether it's a written down budget, or as Pastor Ryan said, just concepts, categories in your head to know where your money's going, it's important to have a plan so that you can be faithful to the mission that you have that God has given to your family. For Carrie and I in particular, we felt like part of God's call on our family was to adopt Mariah. So Mariah has special needs, so there's some limitations that He brings to our family, but many, many, many blessings. And so, that's part of us counting the costs. So we know that there are some things that would be harder for us to do because we're not sure Mariah can do those well. Our kids know that there are some ways that they might be limited because they have a brother like Mariah, but that's not ever been a root of bitterness for them. It's just kind of become their norm. And you can probably say that better than I did. But there's things that we'd like to do that are more difficult for us because we have a son like Mariah. But we don't see that as, a burden. Right. We see that this is what God's called us to. And so we're going to be faithful here, even if it means this looks different for us than it does for other families.
And in doing that, I think you're teaching, not our family, but just in general, when you're thinking through others, when you minister, you want to help your kids think of others and not just always them and how it, impacts them, which it's good to process that with kids, but we've always tried to help Addison and Barrett, specifically when it pertains to that topic, is God's called us to bring Mo into our home. We love him. And he's important to us. He's important to God, and so we make sacrifices sometimes for Mo because his life has value, and this is what God has called us to do. He may not have called other families to do that, just like the Stacfords. They have Kristen, and your family's made sacrifices with her health needs, and so it looks different for every family. There's sacrifices that every family has to make for the good of their family and the design of their family. And it looks different. And that's what we have to keep reminding our children over and over again. God's called our family, not just for Mo, but God's called our family to do this, this, and this in ministering to others. So you may not be able to do this, this, and this, but you have to trust that this is what God's called for us to do. And he's teaching us, he's teaching you, children, in lots of ways that will impact your future and how you minister in the future. So I think having the mindset of what we're teaching our kids now has a huge impact on their future, and what's important to us now shapes them and their thoughts and how they do things.
Yeah, just realizing that one decision can affect another. So, as your kids get older and get more involved, it's just thinking about what does saying yes to this mean, and it doesn't mean that you have to say no. It just means counting the cost. Like if I say yes to this, how do we still, complete this mission? And maybe you tweak it, and still having confidence that you're being faithful to what God's called you to do. But just being really intentional with the way you see your time and your finances and how you commit those, and then talents and skills, like Pastor Ryan said too. We want to know that we're being faithful stewards of the skills and the spiritual gifts and the abilities that the Lord's given us individually. But I think as parents, it's important for us to help our kids see the importance of that too. So, God's given you these abilities or these interests or these passions. How do you use those to advance His kingdom? Not just for selfish gain, but how do you use it to advance His kingdom? Addison's in 11th grade, so she's starting to think about future vocation and college and all those things, and that's been a part of the conversation is, your calling isn't just God has called you to do this vocation. Your calling is first and foremost, you're a follower of Christ, and you need to be a good steward of all that He's given you. And so there's a lot that she takes into consideration. Does she want to be married and be a mom? Well, then she wants to think about a career path that's going to be suitable to that. So just helping our kids see that it's not the career that's the most important, but it's my calling is first and foremost follower of Christ, and then how has He gifted me? What passions and interests has He given me? And how can I use those to advance His kingdom? So helping our kids understand that. And part of that is I think, like even when Pastor Ram was talking about time, kids, they don't feel any responsibility mostly. They wake up every morning and they're like, yeah, they have to go to school, but it's just kind of a routine they do. We, as adults, feel the burden of, I've got to earn money, I've got to pay the bills, I've got to, do this, fix this, I've got to parent my kids. They just sort of live life. But we want them to know that there's important ways to think about their time. So many of our kids are on devices all day long, or in front of a TV, and so just thinking about what's productive. Like, why is it important that I get up and make my bed, or that I put my dirty clothes in a hamper, or that I, I'm talking about my son, or that I hang up my towel after I take a shower. Just again, not legalism, but so many hours in a day. How am I responsible with those? How am I a good steward of those hours the Lord has given me? So I use some of those to have some devotional time with the Lord. I serve other people. I do my homework. I study. It's not just all about how am I going to entertain myself today. So that's an important, I think, lesson that we need to be teaching and instilling in our kids. How can they learn to steward their time and their interest and skills and abilities in a way that would be pleasing to Christ as they grow into adulthood? I read an article one time. Go
I
ahead.
was just gonna say, I think it's challenging because, you talk about your family, and you have to say no to some opportunities because of the limitation you have built in. But without that limitation automatically there, like, I'm always telling my kids, there's always more opportunities than what we can do.
Mm-hmm.
So just having to say no to some things is
Yeah.
just hard, because
Sure.
if we look out at our peers and, other people, it's like they're enjoying a zillion things. And it's like, why can't I have all that?
Right.
And it's just like, it's kind of hard to work through that. Like, well, we could say yes to all these things, but what, how to choose those? Because our priorities are different than theirs, and we're busier than they are. So to them,
Sure.
so it's just,
I'm glad you brought that up, Molly, because that is an important point, and I think every parent deals with it. We hear it all the time, even in my case, being in the ministry full time, like Sunday mornings, I can't miss work, So like travel ball just isn't an option for us for that reason, but there would be other reasons we would probably choose not to do it. But yeah, we hear it all the time. Well, so-and-so does this, or so-and-so does that, or why can't we? And I think we should evaluate every opportunity. How does it fit in with the mission God's given us? Don't say no just to say no. Don't say no because it's inconvenient for mom and dad. I know for us, sometimes even the kids' events related to church, like, we got Addison and Barrett both in equip groups and small groups. And so sometimes it's easy to go, oh, you got to go here tonight, but then when you realize what it is they're doing, it's like, that's important. We're going to make time for this. We're not going to lament it. I think we have to do what we know is best for our family, what's best for our kids, what God's called us to, and we've got to be ready to stand firm on that. I find it a real struggle, even like with entertainment. Like, can we watch this? No. Why? So-and-so watches it. Their parents let them. And I want to say their parents shouldn't let them.
Right.
I try to be open-minded. Generally what I do is I'll go to a review. I'll look up a Christian review, even a non-Christian review. Just tell me what's in this show, Tell me what language they use, what topics are in there. And eventually, and then I'll say yes or no. And I'm responsible for God to make that decision for my family. I can't let peer pressure from my child dictate those conversations. Now, I wish that we would all have maybe a more consistent ethic in some of those things, and that we could be a support to one another as families in the church. But it's not always the case, and so you have to do what you feel like is best for your family. And I know it can be hard. We battle out a lot with entertainment, with technology, and even with extracurricular type of stuff, OP, we're overprotective, everything's...
I don't know what kind of names a mom can be called, but I have been ranged from like up to dictator. So I've been to all that spectrum there.
psycho.
So,
I get called
You could just
psycho.
say, I'm the benevolent.
That's right. But yeah, I would encourage you not to let other families make those decisions for you, but you decide before the Lord with your spouse what it is that is faithful to your mission, so that you don't live with regrets. We're not going to be perfect, but we still, if we know that our conscience is clear in why we're doing what we're doing, then it's a whole lot easier to handle I wish I would have done it different.
And then we're training contentment, which in and of should be one of our goals as parents, because like they want all these things, and yeah, we could do any and all of these things if we wanted to, but are those things gonna make our lives better? Are they things that we're called to? So
Right, and I think helping your kids understand that, and that's what we try to do with our kids, is why are we saying no? Well, we're saying no to travel ball because finances and because of the demand on our time. Like that doesn't fit in with what we feel like the Lord's called us to. That might not be true for every family, but for us, so we would say that. You know, if we committed to these things, then we would never be home. Like we could never have people into our home. We could never minister to people, serve people. We would never have just a quiet evening at home with pizza and a movie. You know, you're counting the cost. Saying yes to one thing means saying no to something else.
But
And
then
so,
also having the conversation and making sure that the children understand that God calls different families to do different things. So we're saying no, but we're not saying that it's wrong if another family does it, but helping them think through why it is, what's important to our family. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so, because I mean, you don't want to raise a bunch of, self-righteous
legalist, right?
My family, that's what, you know what I mean? So we're having to be careful with how you present that to children too,
Sure.
We want to be gracious.
If your family knows your mission statement, then you just keep taking it back to your mission statement. This is what God's called us to. This is why we do what we do. And then lastly is engage the culture as ambassadors. So a couple of verses there. Romans 12 tells us, therefore, brothers and sisters, in view of the mercies of God, I urge you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true worship. Do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may discern what is good, pleasing, and the perfect will of God. And then the second verse that I referenced there was 2 Corinthians 5:20 and 21, which says, therefore we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. So it's the idea that we can't be transformed by culture, but we have to be renewed by the gospel as we engage the culture. And when I use the word culture, I'm assuming everybody knows what I mean. But Christians tend to think about culture in a few different ways. Some sort of unknowingly just tend to embrace it. Others want to entirely oppose it. But I think the right thing to do is engage it. So we're not embracing it, but we're not living in isolation saying, I've got to protect my family from everything out there. Instead, with the discernment that comes from renewing your mind, you're able to engage the culture in a way that you are being disruptive and that you're being salt and light. We were talking about this in our staff meeting last week. We're reading through a book. Man, that's a difficult book to read through. I have to read every chapter like twice just to follow along. It's called, it's by Carl Truman, if you know him. Very smart guy. The rise and triumph of the modern self, or something like that. But what's that? Yeah, exactly. But he's just talking about how our culture is just heading down a path of destruction, and where it started and why, and so it's been really interesting and enlightening, but also it can be kind of despairing because you're thinking, man, there's no hope. And there is hope. And so one of the conversations we were having last week is, what does the church do? So what does the church do in this season that we live in, where we're talking about making abortion available on demand up through birth? Like that's the bill that's in front of the Supreme Court now, which would make us the most liberal country in the world on abortion. And again, it came back to a disruptive witness. Like, we believe in the sovereignty of God. We believe that until Jesus comes back, that the Spirit is still going to quicken the hearts of people to believe. And so we're going to have a role in that as we witness, but the Spirit's going to do it. So we have hope that even though our culture is heading in the wrong direction, that God is still converting people from sinners to saints. And so for that reason, we still have to be this disruptive witness. We still want to be salt and light because people need to see that. Our culture is not so far gone that people aren't going to be saved. And so the answer is that just relationally, individual Christians are salt and light, and then that has impact in our culture. And so I think it's important to engage the culture, but in ways that are appropriate. Our kids go to public school. That's a decision that we've made. Again, we don't judge any other families. For us, that's what's made sense. We reevaluate the decision every year. Sometimes we think, what am I doing? We're mindful of what our kids are hearing, what from teachers, from peers. But open communication, right? But for us, it's a way that we think we're preparing our kids to engage the culture. So we're not making them missionaries right now. We're not saying we're throwing you to the den of wolves so that you can learn what it's like, but we just want them to know that they live in this world, but they are not of the world. And there's other ways to accomplish that. If you homeschool, then just, there's a way that you work all that into the curriculum, or that you just have other peer interactions, private school, charter school, whatever the case. But I think what's healthy is for all of us to understand that we do live in this culture. We can't escape it, but how do we renew our minds so that we can engage it in a way that would be effective? And so as parents, we want to do that well, and we want to help our children to be trained in that way too. So our time's quickly running out. I read this statement from Bruce Ashford, if you're familiar with him, and I thought it was a good way to think about culture. It says, as ambassadors, we are fully immersed in the culture, but everything about us points back to the one that we serve. This doesn't mean we agree with everything culture does, but we learn to understand it and speak its language, identify its true desires, all with the intention of showing how Christ is the only one who can correctly fulfill those well-meaning, though often misplaced desires. So, again, just helping our kids understand what it is they're hearing. So culture, no doubt, will influence your kids. And if you're not working with them, culture can shape your kids in ways that you don't want. And so it's something we have to be mindful of. We can't assume that everything's neutral. I would say nothing is neutral. So as you think about technology and entertainment, realize that nothing is neutral. I would just give some really strong cautions about technology and entertainment in particular. There's so much out there that our kids watch, that your kids' ages watch, that they should not watch. But it just becomes the norm. I mean, even my kids will say, well, it only has this word or that word, or we might say, well, here's why we don't want you to watch it. Oh, we know about that stuff. We hear it at school. Well, but that's not the point, I mean, you may know about it. You may know that the culture champions that, but we're not going to champion it in our home. And just because you hear it out there doesn't mean you need to hear it in your home. Our home should be a place that's gospel-centered, that's focused on Christ. And so we're going to make decisions about what you watch and what you listen to and what we say based on that reality, not because we know you've heard the word before, so it's okay. You're desensitized to it. No. If it's in our home, then I feel like I'm promoting it, and I'm not going to promote something that's ungodly. And then the same with technology. If you give your kids a phone, then please do everything you can do to be responsible with that. There are ways to lock phones down. Be accountable to God for what your kids do on their phones. I would just say make that a contract. Make them know that at any point, at any time, I can come take your phone and I can look at everything. And just teach your kids, proper use, not only with the scrolling and how much time they spend on it, but just how they use it as a tool for good or evil. Again, nothing's neutral. It's not just a phone anymore. It's not just to call people. There's a lot that they can do on there. A lot of things that they can access that they don't need to access. And there's much more that could be said on that. And I think our next weekend workshop might actually be on technology, so you can look forward to more of that. But sexuality and gender, sanctity of life, those are all things that we're just, the Christian faith really combats our culture on those things. And so help your children understand what the Bible has to say about those things so that as they're engaging the culture, they're not influenced by the culture. So in wrapping up, I would just say we have a responsibility to be good stewards of our family. It doesn't just happen. And I think you know that. You've been parents long enough to know that it doesn't just happen. We have to be intentional. We have to think about how we spend our time, how we spend our money, how we're discipling our children in order to make sure that we're doing what God's asked us to do. And then when you find that you've gotten off path, just recommit to get back on it again. I mean, don't lament the time that's gone by, but be a good steward of what's still to come. Maybe you would write a plan down. Maybe you would say, we can't seem to stick with a plan, so let's write it down. Let's meet as a family and let's talk about what God's called us to, and then help your kids be able to put things in categories. And then, the goal would be that our children become faithful and effective followers of Christ and witnesses of the gospel. So that really is what our goal should be, not that our kids have every privilege in life, that they've had every fun experience that every other kid's had, but that they have been taught to love God and to love others and to be an ambassador in that way. And just pray and ask God to help you to do that. Any final questions? I'm sorry, I didn't save much time. All right, let me pray, and we'll get back in for the main session. God, we're grateful for the gift of family. Lord, we know that it's not good that we live in isolation, and so the fact that you've given us spouses and children is a real gift, and we do want to be a good steward of that. Lord, it's a big responsibility. Sometimes it just seems incredibly overwhelming. But we know that your Spirit can give us wisdom and strength to do it well. And I pray that we would all be committed to that, or that we would see what's at stake, that we would not be okay with the culture influencing our children, but that we would be a stronger voice as we speak your words to our children and even to one another. Lord, I pray that would be true of Open Door and just for every believing family in our world. Lord, help us to be a disruptive witness in that way. And it's all for your glory and honor. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.